Good morning. This is the second part of our anecdote about President Carter. To continue, let's look at things from a different point of view. In economics, there was an upheaval in the United States in our economic system. We went from home economics to individual rights. And if I remember our base anecdotes, they threw out God, they threw out the idea of it being normal and well-adjusted, and they threw out the idea of willing the good of another person, or a normal supply and demand curve. And they replaced it with a peasant and property class society with themselves as the upper class, complete with a 3-martini lunch and designer cocaine and getting into all the gold and real estate they possibly could. They do the consuming and everybody else does the producing. And so perhaps President Carter didn't fail, he simply lost. And in Nicaragua, Ortega, that dictator, I was told, did the same thing to the United States that Fidel Castro did in the 1960s. That is, they said, give us guns and money and training. And as soon as they won, they said, we're really communists. And they kicked the United States out, and they became a communist dictator. We were simply hustled once again. And being hustled doesn't make us guilty, and it doesn't mean we failed. In fact, it means we're one of the good guys. We were simply had. And in the Middle East, President Carter did something nobody ever dreamed he could. He did bring peace to the Middle East. There was a peace accord between Israel and Egypt, but then something happened. As soon as it became institutionalized, there was promptly a coup in Egypt. They shot everybody up, took over, and put things back to the way it was, where everybody was at each other's throats. And in Iran, the king of Iran at the time, who was an ally of the United States, was bringing his culture into the 21st century, complete with the gals being allowed to wear skirts and dresses, and the guys wearing pants if they chose to. And then what happened was there was a coup. They put the Ayatollah Khomeini in power, and everything fell back into a third world culture. A third world culture with a first-rate military. And so once again, President Carter lost. Which brings us to the 2 points of this anecdote. Our system, our culture, comes out of monks and monasteries and popes. We come out of the Catholic Church. I think of the idea of judges who wear black robes in this country. They wear black robes because Catholic priests 500 years ago wore black robes. And so you have a judicial court, and it's a God and country thing. You have to have God, and then you have a judicial court, and that's where the God and country stuff comes from. And the priest becomes a good guy, and the people who hustle are what defines a bad guy, and life goes on that way. The Pope holds the moral high ground. Some Ayatollah in the Middle East, or some thug in Central America, or some intellectual communists who are university professors in the United States do not hold the moral high ground. The United States holds the moral high ground. Or we did hold the moral high ground. We were eaten out from within, and that's one of the points of this anecdote. President Carter, him and his, the president that came after him, and the 2 presidents that came before him, they simply lost. We still think we're a bunch of Yanks, though. We still think everybody in the country tries to be a Yank and hold the moral high ground. I wouldn't be giving this speech or these anecdotes if I didn't know that most people in this country still try to be an American Yank. Philosophers say you're the 80% brigade, and that's the first point of this anecdote. The second point is that President Carter simply wasn't aggressive enough, him and his. They were just too kind, and too kind turned into losing. There are 3 positions for the second part of this anecdote. The first position is when the United States goes overseas and we give them lots of money and help, only with an expectation that they would simply join us, and instead the scoundrels amongst their group, whatever that group is, simply rise to the top, and they throw us out. They throw everything out, and they become a bunch of thugs, and we simply lose. And that's the first position. The second position is the position of the pimp, whether it's done naturally, like a drug lord, or deliberately, like communist dogma. They would, to use the Middle East as an example, and they would simply go into the Middle East, take over the oil wells, push everybody out into the desert, and they can starve by the millions. They control the economics, and life goes on. There is a third position, and that's the position of the sheriff of Dodge City. And they would, to again use the example of the Middle East, they would go into the Middle East, take over the oil wells, only this time they would say, we're a bunch of Yanks, and anybody that wants to join us, whether they're from Indiana or Iran or Iraq, they can, but they're going to have to play by our rules and work their way into our gang, into the playground. And so those are the 2 points of this anecdote. Perhaps someone out there who's good in the poetic can publicize this. I'm sure you can do a better job than the person you're listening to. And so let's end this anecdote by wishing President Carter well. As he heads off on his next great adventure, I'm sure he'll be up in heaven drinking coffee with the president that came after him and the 2 presidents that came before him. Even though they look completely different, in reality, they all had the same core values. They were all American Yanks. And quite frankly, I hope that Christ fella will show up and tell them to quit lying around upstairs and being lazy, and to send them back down here and tell them to get back to work and finish the job that they started. I wish them well.